Pastor Matthew Stuckey here, and in this video I want to explain to you 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verses 27 through 30, where the Bible speaks about taking the Lord's Supper unworthily, where the Bible speaks about some people getting sick and even dying as a result of taking it unworthily. Now, as a result of this warning that Paul the Apostle gives, around the world, in Baptist churches, when the Lord's Supper is taken, there's a lot of people that will choose not to take the Lord's Supper because they don't want to risk taking the Lord's Supper unworthily. And, when they do this, they usually have the right heart and they're just looking at their lives and realizing they're sinners. But I don't think that is the intent of what Paul the Apostle is speaking about in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Some people apply this to unsaved people and say, well, unsaved people, they're unworthy, so judgment could come upon them. Well, an unsaved person is probably not even going to realize that they're unsaved if they happen to visit church. So I don't think the judgment is coming upon them for just showing up to church and they take the Lord's Supper without really realizing. But if we actually go back in 1 Corinthians, we can see the context and clearly understand what the Bible's speaking about. Now in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, it says, "Purge out therefore the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened, for even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us." And there's interesting terminology here because the Lord's Supper is basically the replacement of the Old Testament Passover, and there are just slight changes from the Passover to the Lord's Supper. And it uses the term of the feast of the Passover. Then it says, "Therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." And in this passage, it actually talks about, in the next verses afterwards, people being kicked out of church for various sins. See, the Bible does teach church discipline that if you have grievous and major sins in your life, and it gives you a list of things in 1 Corinthians 5, then you should actually be kicked out of the local church. It talks about being a drunkard. It talks about, of course, there's a man sleeping with his father's wife in the book of 1 Corinthians. And what the Bible is basically stating is that if you have a major sin and you deserve to be kicked out of the local church and you realize it, but the pastor does not realize it, and you're getting away with it in human eyes, even though God sees it, then you should have a fear of taking the Lord's Supper unworthily, and that should motivate you to get right with God and say, I'm going to get rid of this sin because I don't want to risk being judged by God. But if you choose to take the Lord's Supper unworthily while living in open fornication or adultery, then you could possibly get sick and die as a result, is what the Bible's saying. But this is not saying that if somebody goes to church and they struggle listening to rock music, or they smoke cigarettes from time to time, or they watch bad movies, that they should worry about God striking them down and killing them for taking the Lord's Supper. What it's saying is someone who would brazenly go into church knowing that they deserve to be kicked out of the local church according to what the Bible says, and they choose to take the Lord's Supper unworthily anyway, they should fear. Anyways, thank you and God bless.